Hello, everyone, and welcome to Burn the Ship, the podcast that helps entrepreneurs go all in on their business, and we introduce them to professionals that can help them to do so. Today, we have a very special guest. Joanne, how are you doing today?
I'm just fine.
Excellent, excellent. Please introduce yourself and the name of your organization.
I'm Joanna Underwood. I'm the founder and trustee of Energy Vision, which is headquartered in New York and in Seattle, Washington.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We understand that time is one of our most valuable resources. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, I started my career when I graduated from Bryn Mawr College back in 1962. And there wasn't really an environmental movement at that point. There was a conservation movement, but not a political environmental movement until 1970, when Earth Day happened and when the Clean Air Act and then later the Clean Water Act were passed. And my interest was in journalism. My interest was in educating the public. And my interest was very much in looking at how we could live in a way that would leave a healthy planet behind us for the next generation.
Okay, okay.
So that was my interest, and it has grown ever since.
Now, that is an interesting, just I guess it's not a hobby, but an interesting topic to pick up on at that particular time, with it not being many people in that industry. Was it something that was going on in your life where you were living? Were you on a farm? Or what is it that made you have an interest in the energy and the conservation?
I was living in New York City, and my interest was just a general look at the world around us even then. And I first was working with an organization that invited me to take my research skills and help them investigate business practices.
Okay.
And I thought, well, that's an interesting thing to do. Before that, I had been at Time Life for a number of years. And at Time Life, I had proposed and then drafted a report for the international division on what was called the report Planned Parenthood, birth control,
Mm-hmm.
the history of birth control. And it interested me at Time Life because this was an issue that was beginning to break out around the world. And uh, people didn't have materials to read about birth control that made it an understandable topic for them. There were a lot of technical and scientific reports, but not something that was easily readable by the general public. And so that's what I proposed to Time Life, and that's what I ended up drafting. So my interest was in the condition of the world, but also the condition of people's lives. And as I completed that project, I was asked to come and help start an organization that would investigate business practices. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, because what determines the quality of our life more than what the environment is like and what corporations do with it?
Mm-hmm.
That corporations are the ones that use resources and provide services, and they're the ones that we need to look to do this in a sustainable way.
Is that the organization Impact? Is that what that is? That at that particular time in the 70s where you were working on?
I was working on, uh, I went from the Council on Economic Priorities, by the way, that was interested in investors, and I was more interested in reaching a broad public
Okay.
about the ways corporations could perform. So I started an organization called Inform
Inform. Okay.
in 1963,
Mm-hmm.
73, and and that organization was named after the Thomas Jefferson quote, which I have always cared most about, which is, "You can only trust a democracy to an informed public."
That does make sense because if you don't have the correct information, it's hard for you to make a good decision on things. So it seems like investigative reporting is where we're going here. We're in 1963, 1967. We're with, you said it was Inform, was the name of it?
1973.
73. Okay, 73. Okay.
Yes, that was in form, yes. And I
Okay.
ran it for 30 years.
30 years. Okay. So 30 years, you are just trying to let the public know how these larger corporations are utilizing their resources. Was it a bunch of articles that you did or what was
No,
the
no,
work you
no.
were doing?
Actually, we published in the history of Inform almost 100 reports,
Okay.
major reports,
Mhm.
not just articles, but we also published lots of those. But the reports were aimed in two directions. One was to look at industries that seemed to be badly using the environment and creating great dangers, like the copper smelter industry, the land sales development industry, a number of energy industries. And we were interested in how those businesses could be reformed and operate differently. Um, the other direction we took was wanting to look at industries that were essentially very creative and innovative, like the solar energy industry, the wind industry, um, ways you could promote these very innovative forms of business. So we weren't just critiquing business, we were saying it can go both ways. You can have problems you need to address, and you have innovations you need to encourage. And there we began to focus on business practices from a particular point of view, which was how do you prevent the problems they cause at the source? So we were not so interested in band-aids. For example, we were less interested in catalytic converters in cars. We were more interested in using a intrinsically cleaner fuel than gasoline or diesel.
Mhm.
So our interest was in the preventive side, and we spent 4 years looking at the chemical industry and asking, could they prevent their waste at the source? And that was in an era when all the focus was on managing waste effectively, because it was assumed in the 70s that corporate practices were efficient and that the wastes were something that you had to create and had to deal with. And we asked a separate question, uh, and that question was, do we need to produce these wastes in the first place? And we found that in the U.S. chemical industry, from a study of 29 plants specifically, that you could reduce your toxic waste generation by 50 to 80% if you looked at the source of the waste rather than just thinking you had to manage it.
Mhm.
And we published our first report, Cutting Chemical Waste, uh, and that helped directly to inspire the first law in this country that said prevention should be our top priority. And that was the US Pollution Prevention Law of 1990. So that was the first time that the federal government said, um, let's think prevention first, and then recycling, and then reuse, and then disposal. But preventive action was the top of the food chain. And for that, in fact, we received a national award from EPA for our leadership in advancing this strategy.
That's amazing that your questions that you had on how we can do better truly had an effect on laws that we have in order now. Were there additional laws that you were able to affect after you were able to get this first one done in the 90s?
Oh, the studies that we did of land sales industry practices in Florida, in the Southwest, uh, those studies encompassed first looking at the sites themselves and seeing what they were doing to the environment, how they planned for water use, what they did, what their resource conservation was. But second of all, we then looked at the policies that you could put in place to improve the practices in the industry. And our approach was always look at the problem that you're concentrating on first. Look at that, look at those businesses, look at what they're doing and what they could do differently. And then, secondarily, we would say, what kinds of public policies could make these things happen?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, what was thrilling to us was finding ourselves in a position to basically argue for policies that could achieve the kinds of change we knew uh, could be occurring.
Yes. Now, the work that you were doing was helping us overall, the human beings, the animals here on Earth, and it was for the greater good. But I am confident that you received some resistance from those companies that said that, hey, don't be messing with my stuff. Do you have maybe a abbreviated story that you can share where you came into some of that resistance to change?
Well, wherever we were studying an industry that had practices that needed to be reformed, we faced resistance. The copper smelter industry, even the workers were scared we were going to cost them their jobs. The land sales industry, absolutely. Uh, the paper industry, we published a 700-page report called Paper Profits. And honestly, one of the senior vice presidents of one of the largest paper companies in the country said there was a headline in the Midwest paper, little girls in miniskirts playing God. And so we had pushback. The biggest pushback was the refusal to give us information. And so we reported both on what we learned about companies, but we also reported on what we couldn't report on because they wouldn't tell us. And that was an interest in breaking open public information. And it was an interest in then pursuing the industry. So we didn't stop when we did research. I would say we had sort of three priorities: one, to do the research; two, to look at the policies; and three, to go out and actually work on promoting change on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a lot of resistance in all of those areas. But of course, over the last 30 years, there has been more dialogue. We've also developed a reputation through my 30 years at Inform, where, as I said, we published more than 100 reports, and each one was specifically looking at an industry sector and saying what could be done here. If we want a sustainable future, companies need to be using natural resources that are not toxic. They need to be making things that can be recycled and reused. And hopefully, when those things, those products, consumer products, are no longer usable, that they should be disposed of in a way that doesn't leave permanent contamination on our planet. So the question of preventive action of green business operations was always foremost in our mind.
Yeah, that's amazing. 30 years of service, because everyone that's watching today has to understand you have to have a big heart to care that much about others. Because ultimately, that's what it is. You're having the mindset of how can I help all of these other people that are on this planet, being selfless. And I know that you came across a lot when you were trying to gather that information from those corporations, because a lot of times they're just focused on the dollars and they're trying to stop everyone that's impeding that at all. So thank you so much for your time and your service of that 30 years with Inform. Now that puts us in the 2000 area. What was your next chapter of your life? What happened after you wrapped things up with Inform?
Well, Inform had a multi-issue agenda, and I found more and more that I would like to focus on one major issue, and really put time into that because it was so critical to the future of the world. And so I started an organization called Energy Vision. And the focus there was saying, how can we move beyond the era of fossil fuels? How
Hmm.
can we move to fuels and energy sources and transportation fuels um, that are not fossil fuels? So they're not generating the carbon and the greenhouse gases and the health threatening emissions. And how can we go to what may be the fuels of the future? And I started that in 2007. And in fact, I've now been running that organization for 18 years.
Okay. Okay.
So it's been a long haul, but our goal was to look at all of the possible fuels and write about what their benefits were and what liabilities they had. We looked at everything from natural gas to hydrogen to battery power. Um, and we came across one possible new fuel that was not talked about in this country. This was back in 2010, and yet we found it something that had great potential. I was actually traveling in Norway, and I saw that the buses there were being powered by the gases from their sewage treatment plants.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's interesting. And when I came back to the United States, I went down to Washington to speak with people at the US Department of Energy. And I said, we haven't done much about this. This idea of extracting the methane from organic wastes like wastewater or food waste or manures from cows, and then refining it into a clean fuel that could replace fossil fuels. And they were interested in the idea. We did the first briefing for all of their affiliates across the country, and then started digging in intensively, looking at this new industry, which is actually called the anaerobic digester industry, because an anaerobic digester is an airless plant. And if you take any kind of organic waste, it could be anything from, as I say, food waste or manures, yogurt waste from factories. It could be dead cows. It's anything that's organic. When it breaks down, it emits methane, which is one of the most potent of the greenhouse gases. And if you capture that methane in these anaerobic digesters, you can then refine it into a fuel that is chemically very similar to fossil natural gas, four hydrogen atoms and one carbon atom, only almost pure hydrogen. And you can take that fuel and you can use it in three sectors of the economy that you can't electrify.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone talks about electrification now, but there are some sectors that can't be successfully electrified, and they include heavy industry, uh, they include old houses, and they include heavy duty trucks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They can't be successfully electrified at this point. Whether they ever will be, I don't know. But what we can do with them now is we can put to work this fuel, which is called renewable natural gas. And the way I distinguish it from fossil gas that we've always used is that fossil gas digs methane up from underground and releases it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anaerobic digestion captures methane that's already being generated above ground by all these organic wastes. They capture it and turn it into a clean fuel. So it's a totally different process. And if you leave those fossil fuels underground, they don't do damage. They're just down there. But if you don't capture this methane generating, rotting organics above ground, will never solve our climate change problem. And the more humans we have on the planet, the more methane there will be from their farming operations, from what they eat. And so that seemed to be a resource for a clean fuel that had relevance all over the world, and that could produce both a reduction in greenhouse gases by capturing methane, but it could also then produce a fuel that was replacing fossil fuels
Yes,
in sectors.
you can tell that you're very knowledgeable when it comes to these things, the renewable energies, the old fossil fuels. But I want to take one step back. Now, you were doing Inform for 30 years. You realized that with energy vision, you were going into more of a singularity type thing. Was it a specific event that happened that made you say, hey, I'm going to burn the ship and go all in on energy vision instead of staying with the broad conservation? Was it a specific thing that happened that made you say, hey, I'm going to go all in on this?
No,
Okay.
it
Okay.
wasn't really. Um, I still feel that tackling toxic wastes of all kinds in the world is critical. There are so many issues tackling the problems, frankly, that are involved with this exploding population. There are issues of population and environment, all of which seem important to me. But I think the question is, what can you do and leave the greatest footprint? How can you have the greatest impact? And I felt that this one issue of leaving the era of fossil fuels behind was so critical that I wanted to just put all my time into it. If I had infinite funding, I would have carried a lot of the other issues perhaps with me. But with what we were able to do, I figured we better focus if we're going to have a real impact. So that's what we did.
Okay.
And
Makes.
also, what's
Mhm.
interesting is that when you talk about the problems of coal, you're talking about major pollution and resource destruction in this country. But when you talk about oil, you're talking not just about greenhouse gases and environmental destruction, you're also talking about war and the wars around the world for oil. And so that one, because oil is used predominantly in transportation, that's where we tended to focus in the fossil fuel arena. But all of these things are important. It just determines on where you think you can contribute the most and where you think there's need for more work being done that is being done. So I suddenly lean toward this.
Okay. And as we are talking about energy vision, tell us a little bit more about, those people that you're looking to get in contact with to help the organization continue to grow. Who would you say would be a good connection for you to get in contact with?
I've always thought, frankly, that Warren Buffett should have been a supporter of our organization and Bill Gates.
Okay.
And I just have been more focused on the policy issues than on the fundraising, which is, of course, terrible for a CEO of an organization. I'm no longer the president. I turned the presidency over to an extraordinarily technologically literate and fabulously educated person called Matt Tomic, who is our president now. And I am the founder and a trustee, but he is the president. Um, and so, what we need to do is to build our base of individual donors. We need that like mad. We need to expand our foundation support. Very few foundations have supported this organization. It's because the name renewable natural gas, which became important to us, reminded people of natural gas and fracking. And as many times as we said, what we're doing has no relationship to fracking. It has to do with capturing escaping gases and turning them into a very clean fuel. And so that was an impediment to our raising money from foundations. It is my hope that now that the world is very focused on uh, methane as a potent greenhouse gas, And the international scientific community has basically said if we don't reduce the world's methane emissions 30% by 2030, which is just a few years from now, that we may very well find ourselves in the state of runaway climate change, where there is so much melting of glaciers, etc., releasing so much carbon that we won't be able to stop it. And it will mean that major parts of this world will not be habitable. And we already see the tremendous rise in forest fires, in storms, in droughts, in tornadoes, in glacial melting. We see all this, which is the obvious evidence that we're putting carbon up in the atmosphere that is trapping heat, and that it is an urgent priority to meet that goal in tackling climate change, that goal of reducing methane 30% by 2030. And it so happened that the strategy we'd been studying, which was anaerobic digestion, is one of the best ways to trap methane. So that's tremendously exciting to me. But we need now, because we have no federal support on the climate issue, the decision makers and the people we need to reach most now are state governments and municipal governments, because digesters are built on the local level. Energy supply is done on the local level. And on the local level, communities are struggling with their organic waste burdens. And so reaching out to the states and helping them develop programs that might reach 30% reduction in methane by 2030 is, to me, the way we need to go now. We are working already with the first state, which is the state of Washington, and helping them actually do the planning to meet the 30 by 30 goal. And that goal, by the way, was first articulated by the international climate community in 2021, when they finally concluded that we had to leave fossil fuel behind and that we had to reach this methane reduction goal as our world's top priority. And one of the first countries that signed on to that global methane pledge was the United States. But now there are 158 countries around the world that have all sworn that they will meet this global goal. And we don't want to let them see that the United States is dropping out. So if states can pick up the reins of leadership, then we have a real story to tell the rest of the world that Americans still care. And we're going to do all we can.
Yes, thank you so much for doing your part, because it takes individual effort to get out there and make things happen. And again, I know the course or the path that you're on is not the smoothest one, because again, you are trying to create change. And I appreciate you sticking in there and being one of the ones that's going to try to help us to take care of this issue that a lot of people are not paying attention to. So I definitely appreciate you sharing about Energy Vision and what you guys have going on and how you're trying to help people in the future. I wanted to ask, over this time, we're talking about almost 50, 60 years you've been doing this. You have acquired and nurtured some of those best practices or business skills that have allowed you to continue to go and do the things that you're doing. Do you mind sharing with the entrepreneurial audience that's watching today some of those best practices that have helped you to be successful, that they can possibly add to their bag and help them to be successful?
Well, I could try. I think if you're talking about entrepreneurs tend to be very focused on telling their people that they recruit what to do. And I think one of the important skills is that you have to go from the mode of telling people what to do that are a small band around you to actually delegating responsibility and defining what people's jobs are, in your organization and what they're responsible for, and overseeing that, but not simply being the Sun King. That you're really nurturing talent amongst people and then helping them by asking them questions. And I think one of the best oversight tools in working with a staff is to ask questions. How did, are you doing this? How did you do it? What problems did you have? So that they grow and learn at the same time. So that question of team building, I think, is very, very important. Um, the uh, the other thing is fundraising. Um, I think the important thing there is uh, for people to think about what they're doing not as wanting dollars, but as wanting to convince people that their issue and their approach to their issue is unique in some ways and important in many ways. And that what you want to do is to convince them that they should join your team one way or another and give you help. Then, if they can give money, that's great. But maybe there are other things they can do to help you too. And the door should be wide open for the ways in which people or organizations can help you do your job, help you accomplish your goals. So I think how one approaches fundraising, it isn't to just go and say, here I am, here's what I do, please help. It's to really emphasize what your goal is, why it matters, why it is unique. To be sure, don't assume that the person you're talking to knows, and to be basic. Um, and then let them help you in the best ways they can. So I think fundraising is very important. And also, I would say something I've learned, which may not be appropriate for everyone, but in doing, when you've learned about an issue and you go out and you talk about it, it's better to say why this issue can be solved in certain ways than to say you should do this. People don't much like to be, oops, excuse me.
It's okay.
I'm on a Zoom call, I'll call you back. Sorry.
It's okay.
Uh, so that it's really, you're building a team of people that can work together and that they share. And I think that's one of the hardest things for entrepreneurs to do. We had some help in the early days of Inform from McKinsey and Company. And they came in and looked at our operation. And I said, I don't know how a big corporation can manage thousands of employees when I'm having trouble with 20. That was the challenge. And they said, you cannot, you can only successfully oversee, if you're an entrepreneur, about 5 or 6 people. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
You can't effectively oversee more than that. So when you get to a team of that size, then you really have to start delegating responsibility. And that's when questioning people about what they're doing and how they're doing it can get the best results rather than saying, do this, do this, do this.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing those experiences that you've had. You can tell that you're a wealth of knowledge because of all of the situations, scenarios that you've been through, as far as creating the organization, managing the team, digging into those investigative reporting. Definitely appreciate you sharing some of those skills and best practices that you have utilized over time. Now, I want to just change it up just a little bit. We understand that you are truly a conservation queen and focused on helping the environment, but I want to lighten it up just a little bit. So let's just say that we are capturing all of that methane, we're putting it into our buses and our vehicles and our businesses, and things are coming along great. And time and money was not an issue. What is it that you would do with your time if you didn't have to worry about the environment for a second?
I'm inspired in worrying about the environment, I must say.
Mm-hmm.
And if I weren't doing what I'm doing now, I enjoy walking. Uh, I enjoy reading. I enjoy relaxing because I really work most of the time. And I had a wonderful husband for 26 years who is an artist. And we love to travel and we love to read and relax. And that's really what I love to do.
Is it walking at the lake? Is it walking on the beach or in the mountains? What does that setting look like for you?
Anyone, I
Anyone?
walk in the city
Okay. Okay.
every day.
Okay.
So, I mean, just walking is good for your brain and it's good for your health.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's a way to also keep seeing things from a fresh point of view. That's pretty much it. I used to sing a great deal.
Okay.
I played the guitar in my early years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I loved that. And I stopped, frankly, because in 1982, the year I got married,
Mm-hmm.
I got breast cancer.
Okay. Okay.
And um, so my right arm, which is useful for a guitar, had a lot of difficulties. And so I couldn't play as much. And I did it less and less. And actually, I missed it more and more. And so I'm starting to do that again now.
Okay. Awesome. That's magnificent. You picked that back up after having to let it go so long ago.
Long ago.
Yeah. So so if I were to put you on the spot, you can pick up the guitar and play a song.
Not right now. I wouldn't do it for not for a million years.
Okay.
I go off quietly and do it myself.
Understandable, understandable. I definitely appreciate you sharing those things and peeling back those layers of the onion as well. We want our audience that is watching to know, again, we put all this hard work together and put all these things together so we can enjoy some parts of this thing we call life, and I appreciate you sharing that with us a little bit. Now, if the members that are watching today have any additional questions or want to get informed about your organization or the business skills that you've shared, what is the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Well, they can get in contact through email, and that is Underwood at energy-vision.org. That's my email address. They can look at our website, energy-vision.org, which will tell them all about the work that we're doing. I'm in New York City. I'm at 646-469-1864 if they really need to call.
Mm-hmm.
But I hope people will go and look at what we're doing, and if I can be helpful to them. I want to make one last comment, which is we all make mistakes when we're doing this work. We don't always all live up to the way we think it should be done. And my view is if people make mistakes, they should just try to forgive themselves and go on, because no one does a perfect job. We're all fragile creatures. We're all going to live only a certain amount of time in this world, and we can only do so much. So we should be careful about our expectations. We should be careful about our sense of confidence, but we shouldn't worry. If we make mistakes, you pick yourself up and go ahead and try something again.
Thank you so much for that wonderful word. I was going to ask you to share with us, the final word, but I think that's a great one for people to understand. So we definitely appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And to everyone that is watching today, be kind and thanks.